In 1921, a cook named Walt Anderson started selling 5-cent hamburgers out of a converted streetcar in Wichita, Kansas, and accidentally invented the American fast food empire. Nobody trusted ground beef back then, so Walt built his stand from white porcelain and steel, put the grill in the window, and let you watch every patty cook. That trust is why you order a burger today without thinking twice. Number 14 served a sandwich so strange, customers were warned not to ask what was in it. Number 3 gave free burgers to anyone who proved they walked there. And number 1 was so far ahead of its time that McDonald's brothers admitted they copied it. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 25 long-lost American burger joints. Number 25, Wetson's. If you grew up in New York or New Jersey in the 1960s, Wetson's was your first taste of fast food, long before a McDonald's ever appeared on Long Island. Herb and Errol Wetson opened it in 1959 with a deliberate copy of the West Coast model nobody on the East Coast had seen yet. The Big W burger sold for 15 cents, the same price as a McDonald's hamburger at the time, and they undercut everyone on fries. At its peak, there were around 70 locations crowding the tri-state area. Kids remember the orange and white buildings and the smell of griddle onions hitting you from the parking lot. But here is the problem. Wetson's never expanded beyond the Northeast, and when McDonald's and Burger King finally marched into New York with national advertising budgets, a regional chain selling the same burger had no defense. In 1975, Wetson's merged with Nathan's and quietly disappeared. An entire generation's childhood gone in a contract signing. Number 24, Biff Burger. Down in Florida and across the Southeast, Biff Burger built its whole identity around one thing: a tangy, roto-broiled burger cooked on a rotating gas flame instead of a flat-top griddle. The meat came out with a flame-kissed flavor that flat-top burgers could not match, and they doused it in a secret sweet and sour sauce that people still try to recreate today. The name stood for best in fast food. A burger cost around 19 cents in the early 1960s, and the buildings had those space-age, angled roofs that screamed optimism about the future. At its height, there were over 200 Biff Burger stands. But the chain was a loose franchise operation with weak central control, and when the giants started spending millions on television, Biff Burger had no unified voice to answer back. Most locations closed or rebranded by the 1970s. A single stubborn Biff Burger reportedly survived in St. Petersburg for decades, a ghost from a vanished world. Number 23, Sandy's. 4 restaurant operators from Illinois got tired of paying franchise fees in the late 1950s and started their own chain to compete directly with the burger they had been selling. Sandy's leaned into a Scottish theme, complete with a tartan-clad mascot, and built a loyal Midwestern following through the 1960s. The burgers were cheap, the thick shakes were the draw, and the buildings dotted Illinois, Iowa, and Wisconsin. They grew to roughly 230 locations. Here is what killed them. Sandy's was so similar to the chain its founders had broken away from that competing head-to-head became impossible once that rival went national. In 1972, Sandy's merged into Hardee's, and within a few years, the tartan signs came down forever. The men who started it just wanted independence. Instead, they got absorbed into exactly the kind of machine they had tried to escape. Number 22, Henry's Hamburgers. At one point in the early 1960s, Henry's had more locations than McDonald's. Let that sink in. Backed by the Bresler family of ice cream fame, Henry's spread to more than 200 stands across the Midwest, selling 15-cent burgers under a bright, cheerful sign. Their slogan was a jingle that promised you could not eat just one. But Henry's made a fatal mistake. They never adapted. While McDonald's built drive-thrus, pushed standardized operations, and poured money into advertising, Henry's stayed exactly the same year after year. One by one, the locations went dark through the 1970s and 1980s. As of recent years, a single Henry's Hamburgers was still operating in Benton Harbor, Michigan, the last survivor of a chain that once outnumbered the company that buried it. People drive hours just to eat there and touch a piece of history. Number 21. Burger Queen. Before anyone snickers, Burger Queen was a serious operation, founded in Florida in 1956 and built into a southern powerhouse based out of Kentucky. The mascot was Queenie Bee, and the chain became known for a flame-broiled burger and a soft-serve ice cream program that rivaled anyone in the South. At its peak, there were around 400 locations spread across the Southeast and Midwest. The burgers were solid, the prices were fair, and for 2 decades, Burger Queen was a genuine regional giant. But the name became a liability as the market consolidated, and the obvious comparison to a much larger rival made the chain look like an imitation even when it was not. In 1981, the whole thing was rebranded as Druthers, and that name lasted barely a decade before most locations converted to Dairy Queen. The crown slipped off so quietly that almost no one noticed it fall. Number 20. Burger Boy Food-O-Rama. Ohioans of a certain age get misty when you mention BBF. Founded in Columbus in 1961, Burger Boy Food-O-Rama had one of the great names in fast food history and a mascot, a smiling boy in a chef's hat that kids genuinely loved. The chain grew to dozens of locations across Ohio and into neighboring states. Their 15-cent burgers and family-friendly dining rooms made them a weekend tradition for working families who could finally afford to eat out. Then Borden, the dairy giant, bought the chain in the late 1960s, and corporate ownership slowly strangled the regional charm. By the mid-1970s, the squeeze from national chains had become unbearable for a single-state operation, and BBF faded out. The buildings became other restaurants. The smiling boy in the chef's hat exists now only in faded photographs and the memories of people who are now grandparents themselves. Number 19. Gino's. This one has a great American story behind it. Gino Marchetti was a Hall of Fame defensive end for the Baltimore Colts, and in 1957, he and a few teammates put their names on a burger chain. Gino's took off across the mid-Atlantic, eventually growing to over 300 locations, and becoming so big it acquired the Kentucky Fried Chicken franchise rights for the region. So you could get a burger and a bucket of chicken under the same roof, decades before anyone called that a combo concept. The Gino Giant, a double-decker burger, predated the Big Mac and inspired fierce loyalty in Philadelphia and Baltimore. But in 1982, the Marriott Corporation bought Gino's and converted nearly every location to Roy Rogers. A football legend's empire was erased with a paint crew and new uniforms. People in Philly still talk about the Gino Giant like a lost relative. Number 18. Carrols. In upstate New York, Carrols was the burger of childhood for 2 solid decades. Founded in Syracuse in 1960, the chain spread across New York, Pennsylvania, and into the Midwest, peaking at more than 150 locations. The Club Burger was their answer to the Big Mac, and locals will tell you it was better. Carrols ran clean operations, friendly counters, and prices that working families could handle on a Friday night. But here is the irony that defines this entire list. Carrols saw the writing on the wall and made a decision that saved the company while killing the brand. In the 1970s, they began converting their own restaurants into Burger King franchises. The company still exists today, one of the largest Burger King operators in the country. But the Carrols name vanished from every sign. They survived by surrendering. The burger that raised a generation of New Yorkers was quietly painted over by the very kind of giant it once competed against. Number 17. Doggy Diner. Out in San Francisco and Oakland, Doggy Diner was beloved for something most people forget. It sold hamburgers right alongside its famous hot dogs. Founded in 1948 by Al Ross, the chain grew to around 30 locations across the Bay Area. Every single one was crowned by a giant rotating dachshund head wearing a chef's hat and a bow tie. That 7-foot fiberglass dog became a regional icon, The burgers were honest and cheap, the kind of food that fueled dock workers and school kids alike for over 3 decades. But as national chains flooded California in the 1980s, Doggy Diner could not compete on price or advertising. The last location closed in 1986. The story does not quite end there. One of those grinning dog heads was saved, restored, and declared an official landmark in San Francisco. The food is gone, but the dog still smiles down on a city that refused to forget it. Number 16. Red Barn. You could spot a red barn from a quarter-mile away because the building was literally shaped like a red barn. Founded in Ohio in 1961, the chain spread to hundreds of locations across the United States and even overseas. Red Barn was an innovator that history barely credits. They introduced one of the first self-service salad bars in fast food, called the Barn Bowl, years before anyone else thought customers wanted vegetables. Their big sellers were the Barn Buster and the Big Barney, burgers that went head-to-head with the biggest names. The mascots were 3 cartoon characters, a hamburger-hungry creature among them that kids adored. But Red Barn was owned by a series of parent companies that lost interest. And when the leases came up in the late 1980s, the corporate owners simply did not renew them. The chain dissolved not from failure, but from neglect. A few of those barn-shaped buildings still stand today, converted into other restaurants, their distinctive rooflines giving away the secret of what they used to be. Number 15. Burger Chef. This is the big one, the chain that should have won. At its peak in the early 1970s, Burger Chef had over 1,000 locations and was second only to McDonald's in the entire country. Founded in Indianapolis in 1954, Burger Chef was a relentless innovator. They invented the Works Bar, where you dressed your own burger, and most importantly, they created the Fun Meal, a kid's meal with a toy and a themed box, in 1973. That is a full year before McDonald's launched the Happy Meal. Burger Chef did it first, and there is even a legal record acknowledging the similarity. So how does the number 2 burger chain in America vanish? General Foods bought Burger Chef and ran it without passion, then sold it off. In 1982, the Hardee's parent company bought the chain and steadily converted every location. By 1996, the last Burger Chef sign in the country came down. The company that invented the kids' meal got erased by the company that copied it. Number 14. White Tower. Here is the chain with the strange sandwich nobody could explain. White Tower opened in 1926 in Milwaukee, and if that white porcelain building and 5-cent slider sound familiar, that is exactly the point. White Tower copied White Castle so closely, right down to the name, the architecture, and the product, that the 2 companies fought in court for years. But White Tower carved out its own loyal following in the industrial cities of the Northeast and Midwest. Workers on overnight shifts packed into these gleaming little buildings at 3 a.m. for a bag of steamed onion burgers. Some locations served a regional oddity, a sandwich so unusual that staff would tell curious customers to just eat it and not ask. White Tower peaked at around 230 locations. But the chain refused to leave the dense downtowns as Americans moved to the suburbs, and urban decay in the 1960s and 1970s gutted their customer base. They never followed the highways. The last White Towers limped into the 2000s before vanishing, victims of a country that drove away from them. Number 13. Royal Castle. Down in Miami, Royal Castle was an institution, the southern cousin of the slider chains. Founded in 1938, it grew to over 175 locations across Florida, and it was famous for 2 things: a tiny steamed burger and a frosty mug of birch beer that came in a heavy glass mug right at the counter. For Floridians who grew up in the 1950s and the 1960s, Royal Castle was open 24 hours and felt like the beating heart of the neighborhood. The food was cheap, the coffee was strong, and the staff knew your name. Then a conglomerate bought the chain in 1969, raised prices, and gutted what made it special. Locations closed in waves through the 1970s. But Royal Castle has one of the most touching endings on this list. A single location, run by a former employee, survived in Miami for decades, keeping the original recipes alive for people who refused to let the taste of their childhood die. Number 12. The original Hot Shops. Before Marriott was a hotel empire spanning the globe, it was a chain of burger and root beer stands. J. Willard Marriott and his wife opened their first Hot Shops A&W stand in Washington, D.C. in 1927. And the burgers and barbecue they sold from those curb service drive-ins built the fortune that became one of the largest hospitality companies on earth. The Mighty Mo, a double-decker burger, was a Washington legend that locals still crave. At their peak, Hot Shops dotted the Mid-Atlantic and pioneered the drive-in experience, where car hops brought food right to your window. But as Marriott pivoted to hotels and the fast food world consolidated, the company let its own restaurant roots wither. The last Hot Shops closed in 1999. The irony is staggering. The humble burger stand did not get killed by a competitor. It got abandoned by the very empire it created, left behind like a ladder kicked away after the climb. Number 11. Yankee Doodle Dandy. In the Midwest, Yankee Doodle Dandy and its cousins in the patriotic-themed burger world sold the American dream on a bun. These chains leaned hard into red, white, and blue, with prices that working families could swing several nights a week. The 15-cent burger was the great equalizer of the post-war era, and chains like this one made sure a factory worker could feed 4 kids for under $1. They were a fixture of the booming suburbs, the places where families went after Little League games and church socials. But they had no national footprint, no television budget, and no defense against the advertising blitzes of the giants. As the 1970s wore on, the regional patriotic burger stand became a casualty of consolidation, folding or selling out one location at a time. The flags came down, the griddles went cold, and a slice of small-town America went with them. Number 10. Burger Chef's rival, Eaton Park's Drive-In Burgers. In Pittsburgh, Eaton Park started in 1949 as a car hop drive-in, where the burgers and the famous Smiley cookie defined a generation of Western Pennsylvania childhoods. The original concept was pure Americana. You pulled in, a car hop clipped a tray to your window, and you ate burgers in your car under the neon. For decades, this was the Saturday night ritual for teenagers cruising the Strip. Eaton Park as a company actually survived by transforming into a sit-down family restaurant chain, which still operates today. But the original drive-in burger stands, the car hops, the trays, the whole rolling diner experience vanished completely. What remains is a different animal entirely. The burgers that built the brand were served from windows that no longer exist, to kids in cars that are now museum pieces, in a version of America that simply stopped existing somewhere around 1975. Number 9. The original Steak and Shake curb stands. Founded in Normal, Illinois in 1934, Steak and Shake built its name on a radical promise: in sight, it must be right, meaning they ground the steak into burger meat right in front of you. This was the same trust-building genius that Walt Anderson pioneered. The open kitchen, the visible proof. The steak burger was thin, griddle smashed, and crispy at the edges, decades before that style became a national obsession. The early curb service stands, with their black and white tile and car hops on roller skates, were the gold standard of the burger drive-in. The company endures today, but the original curb service model, the very thing that made it magical, was phased out as the world moved to drive-thrus and dining rooms. The romance of pulling up under the lights and having your freshly ground steak burger brought to your car window is a memory now, preserved only in black and white photographs and the stories of people who lived it. Number 8. Doggy's rival on the West Coast, Mel's Drive-In Burgers. Mel's opened in San Francisco in 1947 and became the definitive California drive-in. the kind of place immortalized in films about cruising and teenage summers. The burgers were thick, the milkshakes were thick, and the car hops served thousands of teenagers who turned the parking lot into the social center of the city. Mel's was so iconic that it became a symbol of an entire era of American youth culture. But the original Mel's drive-ins were demolished in the 1970s. Some literally bulldozed as urban redevelopment and changing tastes swept the drive-in concept aside. The brand was later revived as a nostalgia restaurant. But the original places, the real ones, where a generation fell in love and grew up over baskets of fries, are gone. They paved a piece of American adolescence and put up parking lots. Number 7. Prince Castle and the birth of the milkshake machine. Prince Castle was an Illinois ice cream and burger chain in the 1930s and the 1940s, and it holds a secret place in fast food history. The man who supplied their multi-mixer milkshake machines was a salesman named Ray Kroc. When Prince Castle's burger and shake business inspired demand for those machines, Kroc went looking for his biggest customer, a little burger stand in California, run by two brothers. You know how that story ends. But Prince Castle itself, the chain that helped set the whole machine in motion, faded into obscurity, absorbed and forgotten. The burgers and shakes that helped launch the most important business relationship in fast food history disappeared from memory, while the empire they accidentally inspired went on to swallow the world. History remembers the arches. It forgot the castle that pointed the way. Number 6. The original A&W burger stands. Everyone remembers A&W for root beer, but the burgers were the other half of the equation. And the Papa, Mama, Baby, and Teen Burger lineup was a stroke of marketing genius that named a sandwich for every member of the family. Founded in 1919, A&W was arguably the first true franchised fast food chain in America, predating almost everyone on this list. The frosty mugs, the car hops, the bubbling root beer on tap. This was the original drive-in template that everyone else copied. At its peak, A&W had thousands of locations. But as the burger wars intensified and corporate ownership changed hands repeatedly, the classic A&W drive-in with car hop service dwindled to almost nothing. A handful of nostalgic locations survive. But the era when A&W was a coast-to-coast burger powerhouse, when the family burger lineup ruled the American roadside, has quietly slipped into the past. Number 5. Wimpy Grills. Before the name became a punchline, Wimpy Grills was a serious American chain founded in Chicago in 1934, named after the hamburger-obsessed character from the Popeye comics. Edward Gold built it into a respected operation across the United States, and the Wimpy hamburger was a sit-down counter institution for working people in dozens of cities. Here is the strange twist. Gold had a rule that the chain would die with him, refusing to let the American locations continue under new ownership after his death. When he passed in 1978, the American Wimpy Grills closed by his own decree. All at once, an entire chain extinguished on purpose. The name lived on overseas, especially in Britain, where Wimpy became enormous. But in America, the chain that helped pioneer the sit-down burger counter vanished in a single planned act. A founder choosing to take his creation with him rather than watch strangers run it into the ground. Number 4. The White Castle imitators of the Slider Wars. In the 1920s and 1930s, White Castle was so successful that it spawned an entire army of copycats with castle-themed names: White Clock, White Hut, White Crest, Royal Castle, and dozens more. These little white buildings selling steamed 5-cent sliders were everywhere in the industrial Midwest and East, feeding the workers who built the modern American economy. Each one had its own loyal neighborhood following, its own grill man who knew the regulars, its own place in the rhythm of a working city. The slider was the food that finally convinced suspicious Americans that ground beef was safe to eat, sold cheap, and cooked in plain sight. But almost all of these imitators, dozens of small chains, were wiped out by the Depression, then by the suburban exodus, then by the highway giants. White Castle itself survived, but the vast ecosystem of slider stands that fed a generation of factory workers disappeared so completely that most of their names exist now only in city directories and faded receipts. Number 3. Insta-Burger King and the walk-up giveaway. Before it became Burger King, the chain started in 1953 as Insta-Burger King in Jacksonville, Florida, built around a machine called the Insta-Broiler. The early operators were scrappy and desperate to draw crowds away from the new drive-ins, and some of them tried wild promotions. One of the most charming was a giveaway aimed at pedestrians. Free burgers for anyone who could prove they had walked to the stand instead of driving. A clever way to pull in foot traffic in growing neighborhoods. The original Insta-Burger King nearly went bankrupt because the Insta-Broiler machines constantly broke down. Two franchisees in Miami, James McLammer and David Edgerton, bought the struggling company in 1954, invented a better flame broiler, and renamed it simply Burger King. The original Insta-Burger King, with its faulty machines and its walk-up giveaways, vanished entirely, the awkward first draft of a company that would become a global titan. Almost nobody remembers it ever existed. Number 2. The original car hop drive-ins of the 1940s. Before any of the name chains conquered America, the burger landscape was ruled by thousands of independent car hop drive-ins, family-owned stands with neon signs, and teenage girls on roller skates clipping trays to car windows. These were the places where the whole culture of the American burger was actually born, not in a corporate test kitchen, but in 10,000 small towns where a local family scraped together the money to open a stand on the edge of the highway. The food was honest, the burgers were hand-formed, and the experience of eating in your car under the stars defined an entire generation's idea of a good night out. These independents had no chance against the standardized, advertised, franchise juggernauts that arrived in the 1960s. One by one, the family drive-ins closed. Their neon went dark, and their lots became gas stations and parking lots. They built the burger as an American institution, and they got almost no credit for it, swept away so quietly that we barely remember they were the foundation everything else was built on. Number 1. The original McDonald's of San Bernardino. Here is the twist that ends everything. The most important burger joint in American history is not the McDonald's, you know. It was a single drive-in opened by Richard and Morris McDonald in San Bernardino, California. And in 1948, they did something that changed the world. They shut down their successful car hop drive-in, fired the car hops, threw out most of the menu, and reopened with what they called the Speedy Service System, an assembly line for hamburgers. No plates, no waiters, no waiting, just 15-cent burgers handed over a counter in seconds. Every other joint on this list was either trying to copy this idea or got destroyed by people who did. The brothers were so far ahead of their time that competitors openly admitted they studied and copied the San Bernardino stand. But the brothers themselves had no ambition to build an empire. When Ray Kroc came along, he bought them out, pushed them aside, and even built a competing store to drive the original out of business. The brothers' name lives on every sign in the world, but the actual men and their actual original stand were erased from the company they invented. The joint that built modern America was killed by the very thing it created, the ultimate ghost at the center of the whole story. So here is my challenge. Next time you drive past an old building with a strange roof line, a barn shape, a faded tile front, a weird angled overhang, look twice. It might be a ghost. Tell me in the comments which one your family remembers. The Gino Giant, the Mighty Mo, that frosty mug at Royal Castle. Because these were not just burger stands. They were where America learned to eat together, and we let almost every one of them disappear.